example of this. Let's look at this company, Pell Products. They produce calculators. And what you have in front of you is you are given the variable cost and fixed cost, the total variable cost and fixed cost, if they produce 1,000 units. So we're told if they produce 1,000 units, the total variable cost would be 8,000, and the total fixed cost would be 30,000, given total cost of $38,000. So now what we have to do, based on this information, we have to fill in the rest of this, and we can do it. So how are we going to do that? And I apologize that this scanned fuzzier than I realized. The first thing we need to know is what's our cost per unit. So it's very important to distinguish between total cost and cost per unit. Cost per unit, we need to know what's our variable cost for every calculator we made. So how are we going to do this? We know that we had $8,000 in variable cost when we made 1,000 calculators. So if I take 8,000 divided by the 1,000 calculators, that tells me that for every calculator we made, we had variable cost of $8. So these variable costs include direct materials, direct labor, etc. Our fixed cost was $30,000 when we made 1,000 units. So if I take 30,000 divided by the 1,000 units, I have $30 of fixed cost per calculator. So if I take $30 plus 8, the total cost per calculator, if I make 1,000 units, is $38. Now I can move forward and do what the total cost and cost per unit will be for the other units of production levels. But before we do that, let's go back to what variable cost per unit means. And I'm going to scroll back up here to page 2. One of the definitions, part of the definition of variable cost, is that the cost per unit is fixed. It doesn't change. Just like when we looked at the gasoline example, my cost per gallon did not change. Just my total cost changes. So I calculated that my variable cost was going to be $8 when I made 1,000 calculators. And that was a variable cost. Therefore, my variable cost is not going to change if I make 2,000 or 15,000, because it tells me down here my relevant range is 500 to 20,000. So as long as I'm in that range of production, my costs are going to be characterized as variable or fixed. So therefore, I can go in and fill in that my variable cost if I make 2,000 calculators is $8, and $8 if I make 15,000 calculators. Now, that we know that, let's go up here and do my variable and fixed cost if I make 2,000 calculators. If I make 2,000 calculators, we know that my variable cost per calculator is $8. If I take that times the 2,000 units, I get $16,000. My fixed cost, remember we looked at fixed cost, and remember we looked at this scenario if you had 4 roommates, 5 roommates, or 1 roommate, or none, that your total rent didn't change. So my total fixed cost is not going to change $30,000 across my activity. So therefore, my total cost if I make 2,000 units is $46,000. We already did what our variable cost per unit would be, but what would our fixed cost per unit be if we made 20,000 units? I would take the 30,000 units and divide it by the 2,000 calculators and get $15 of fixed cost per unit. So that would mean if I made 2,000 calculators, my cost per calculator would be the $8 of variable plus the $15 of fixed to get $23. Now, what if I make 15,000 calculators? What's my total cost? Well, my variable cost per unit is still $8. So now to find my total variable cost, I'm going to take the $8 times the 15,000 calculators to get $120,000 of variable cost. Fixed cost, remember, your landlord doesn't care if you make 1 calculator or 1,000 or 15,000, you're paying that rent. So the total fixed cost does not change, it stays at $30,000. And then that gives me my variable plus my fixed of $150,000 of total cost if I make 15,000 calculators. What about the cost per unit, cost per calculator if I make 15,000? Once again, the variable cost stays at $8, but now my fixed cost is going to be the 30,000 of fixed cost divided by the 15,000 calculators. So it's going to be $2. So if I take my 8 plus my 2, it's $10 per unit. So let's just kind of take a minute, digest the information we just put in here. And if you need to hit the pause button on me, that's fine. I won't be insulted to get all this filled in, and we can then come back and talk more later. Let's just look at this. Why is the total cost of my calculators decreasing as I make more units? My variable cost per unit, so the materials, the plastic to make the calculators aren't changing, but my fixed cost, what's happening? It's decreasing. It went from $30 per unit to 15 to 2, because as we make more calculators, we're spreading those fixed costs out among more objects. Same thing when we looked at fixed costs, when we looked at if you had 4 roommates, 5 roommates, or if it's just yourself. Your rent is cheaper as you have more people live with you, right? Because you're spreading that rent out among more people. Same thing here. So your total cost, so here's some takeaways. Variable cost per unit does not change. Write that down. Variable cost per unit does not change. But our fixed cost per unit decreases as we produce more. And our total cost per unit decreases as we produce more as well because of those fixed costs.